Welcome to the Gastro Girl Podcast. We bring together patients, experts, and health advocates who are all here to help you optimize your health. Here's your host, Jacqueline Garland.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show today. We are so excited. We have the amazing Molly. She is the founder and head patient advocate for Better Bellies by Molly. I love this. I would see her really empowering content all over the internet. She's on Instagram. She has a great website, and she has a very powerful story that we're going to hear today. And we're just going to meet and get to know Molly. So I'm not going to steal her thunder. I'm going to let her tell all about what she's been through and what led her to become the amazing patient advocate that she's become. Molly, it's such a pleasure to meet you today. Thank you so much for joining our episode.
And thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, great. So first of all, can you tell us, just share a little bit about how you became a patient advocate?
Sure. So I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis in 2012. I was 23 years old at the time, and I had just moved to the city of Atlanta by myself and didn't know anyone. So upon my diagnosis, I didn't know anyone else with the disease, not to mention I never even heard of ulcerative colitis when I was diagnosed. And so I literally thought I was the only one dealing with these embarrassing GI symptoms. I was feeling ill. I wasn't feeling confident to talk to anyone about it. I was just very alone and isolated, and of course, like sick and feeling unwell. And so for years, for about 6 years, I lived with ulcerative colitis and then later diagnosed with IBS for 6 years without talking to, friends or family a whole lot about it, without definitely not talking about it on the internet. I never thought I would ever do that. And I just, learned a lot from like learning how to advocate for myself, but like just kind of doing it by searching on the web for things and asking questions and going to the next healthcare provider and the next healthcare provider to find someone to just help me, listen to me, and take me seriously. And then so after years and years of that, I realized, that I'm not the only one going through these things, and that potentially sharing my story, sharing tips and tricks that I've learned over time could help other people, and that I could benefit from also connecting with others with these diseases, because there's just nothing like the power of meeting someone else that simply kind of understands what you're going through, that someone who doesn't go through these types of GI diseases, they just can't understand. But I thought that I could put myself out there to help other people. And that's sort of been my mission, is to cultivate a community, but like empower other patients to not only advocate for themselves, but just not feel alone, because it can be so isolating.
Yeah, and you've done such a great job. It's not easy to share your story and to come out and to kind of champion positivity and really help patients not feel alone. And that's, your story is not unique, and I'm not dismissing it at all. It's
Of course.
the sad thing that it's not unique, because so many patients struggle, but not every patient takes the steps that you've taken to, put yourself out there, create a community, and really help others when you didn't have the help yourself. How long? I mean, 23, that's like such a pivotal age, right? We're kind of through
It
college,
really was.
when embarking on our career, probably going off on our first apartments. And here you are with this diagnosis, and it must have been devastating.
It was. It was so devastating. I was so scared, especially because I had nobody. In terms of like my family was back in Vermont, where I'm from, and I'm here in Atlanta, and I don't know a single person. So I have nobody to call to get me to a colonoscopy. I had nobody to call when I'm like passed out on the floor of the Home Depot. And like strangers are around me, like, "Are you okay? Can I call someone?" And I'm like, "No, like there's no one you can call." Like, so it was just so traumatizing not having social capital at the time. I have since built that capital since I have been in Atlanta for a while now. And I have like an amazing partner who's so supportive, but I didn't have that back then. So it was just extra scary finding a roommate, finding a place to live, finding a job while you're sick. I ended up working multiple, like waiting tables and working retail. And I got my diagnosis while I was working retail, which doesn't provide health insurance, doesn't provide very much income. It doesn't provide a bathroom at the workplace. I mean, like just very challenging things, like running through the mall, trying to find a restroom many times, many traumas around, just working in a mall and not having a restroom access, and being undiagnosed and then being diagnosed, but then not knowing what that really is. So just having to have had navigated that navigating the system, I also acquired a master's degree in public health and healthcare management and policy. So I have since gained education, but then also work experience once I started working in healthcare and now public health. I now have a greater understanding of the system. I've both been in it and I'm in the system, but then I also understand like the bigger picture about how the system works. So I just kind of felt called to share as much as I can with patients to break it down as simple as possible to make it as easy as possible, but it's not easy. Like baseline, it's just not easy. It's a challenging system. But
Well, it
I'm
sounds
just
like you,
trying.
yeah, I mean, you're doing amazing. And I'm sure it hasn't been easy. I mean, your little anecdotes that you said about what happened to you in the Home Depot floor. I mean, that's traumatizing and not having any. I mean, then we all worry about that, even if we don't have a chronic illness and we move to a new
Hmm.
place and we're like all by ourselves and something happens and there's no one to call. It's like, who do I call? Nobody. So let me ask you this. How long did it take you to get your diagnosis? Were you struggling with symptoms for a while? Talk a little bit about that.
So I was probably having symptom like GI symptoms for several months. But then as soon as I started having like urgent bloody diarrhea, and like once the bloody diarrhea started, that kind of sounded an alarm for me that like something was really wrong with me. Like this wasn't just diarrhea, this wasn't just urgency, this wasn't just extreme fatigue and exhaustion, this wasn't, there was something more, I guess, concrete to me that was going on because like growing up, my luckily my mom like had told me that like you're not like if you see blood in your stool, like that's not normal and you're supposed to kind of like say something. So that's
Can I,
when,
I'm going to stop you right there. I'm not being rude. Say that again, because that's an important message right there.
so if you're seeing, blood in your stool, it's not normal. It's not, doesn't, it doesn't mean that, if you already live with IBD that you need to phone emergency, but it is not normal to have blood in your stool, especially if it's a lot of volume and it's consistently happening all the time. Or if you're just pooping straight blood, that's like definitely not normal, even though it does occur with people with IBD.
Thank you, because I really wanted you to hammer home that point because I can't tell you how many guests we've had on the show where they struggled with what you were saying for a lot longer and they ignored it. They ignored the signs
Yeah.
and it gets worse. I mean, what happens when you have ulcerative colitis and it's untreated, right? What it destroys the colon, part of the colon, correct?
Yep. Yep. So like once the blood was substantial, once you could really see it and it was visible and it was quite alarming. I think because I knew that that wasn't normal and I knew that I needed to get seen. And so I first went to a primary care doctor and I knew that I needed to go to a GI specialist. But I expressed like, the bloody diarrhea, all of what was happening in addition to that. And I got referred to a gastroenterologist. That first gastroenterologist gave me a rectal exam, which I wasn't expecting, and then just said, okay, you need a colonoscopy. Here's a pamphlet. You need a driver, and like just left the room. And I just was like fighting back the tears because I knew I didn't have anyone to drive me. And this was in 2012. So like, and you're not allowed to take a taxi. Like those things aren't allowed. So I was just like, what am I going to do? I was so scared. I was also super scared about the prep because my parents had been through it for their colonoscopies for like routine colon cancer screening. So I knew I was just so afraid. Like I was so scared to have to do the prep. I was so scared about being nauseous or not being able to get through the prep and what that would do to my body. I was scared and nervous about how am I going to get to my procedure and all of these things. I ended up flying home to Vermont and so my parents could bring me to the procedure and then bring me home. And I just went to their GI. So that's what I ended up doing. And thanks to them and their support for helping me do that. I feel very lucky about that. And then I got a call a few weeks later. I was in the parking lot in the car after a shift at work. Prior to the call, my mom called me and was like, the doctor called, he found something, but it's going to be okay. Like, you're going to be okay.
Oh,
And I was like, okay. And then he called me and he's like, you have ulcerative colitis. And I was like, okay, like, what is that? And he was, I don't even honestly remember what he said exactly, but I was like, so cool. Like, how do I get rid of it? Like, what do I do? How do I get rid of it? That's like everything I've ever had prior to that. It's like, what medicine do I need to take? What do I need to do? How do I get rid of this? He's like, oh, you can't. Like, there's no cure. And I was like, so I'm gonna have this forever? Like, there's nothing I can do? And he was like, yeah, like you can take medications, but like you'll always have this. And I was like, okay, so I need to take this medication, but I'm still gonna have this. Like, I was just trying to wrap my head around like it's forever, like no matter what I do, like that's how it is. And he was like, yes, he's like, you need to follow up with GI care in Atlanta. And that's what I did. I, followed up with GI care in Atlanta. I was put on, medication for the ulcerative colitis. I was dismissed about all my other symptoms. The medication wasn't really working. The doctor was just basically like, there's good days and bad days. That's just the nature of your disease. And I was like, but I physically am like unwell all the time. And so that's when I really started having to realize that I was just being dismissed and I needed to find another healthcare provider. And that's when I started like trying to find another healthcare provider and another healthcare provider to find someone that was actually who first introduced me to the concept of remission and the concept of being well with IBD and monitoring the disease and kind of opened me up to like what that really looks like. And that took less than a year, but it took a lot of, a few different providers to just find someone to simply listen and introduce remission to me. And unfortunately, I talked to so many other patients who get diagnosed who aren't introduced to the idea of remission or helped much. And so that's why I'm so proud to share my story, but also to help empower other patients to know that they can go to other providers and they need to stand up for themselves until they have someone who's really a teammate in their care.
Yeah. And it's not about just trusting the physician. It's about knowing your body, right? And knowing your body and what you're not going to just accept anything. And if you're not, you said you weren't well, like if it's not helping you, you deserve, and you should, any patient should speak up and try to see someone else who's going to be more open to listening to you and what you expect from the treatment and what is remission and how do you get there and what do you need to do?
Yeah, exactly. I really think there needs to be like an IBD, welcome to your new life with IBD introduction for all patients that just kind of maps out like how many options there are. And there are so many more options than there were in 2012. There's so many new things, so much more research. And there needs to be, I would just love to see something like that.
Dream big, girl. Dream big.
Oh, yes, I have been.
Good. Now you also said you have IBS too. Now, with these symptoms overlap, and that's can be pretty common, this IBD, IBS overlap. And did that happen? Did that diagnosis happen at the same time? Or were you still struggling with some of the GI symptoms like typical ones, bloating and other things?
Yeah. So basically, once I found like a provider who was introducing me to remission and was like, okay, let's get you, you should be able to live a healthy, happy life with these diseases. Basically, or with the ulcerative colitis, what happened was she was like, my ulcerative colitis was not in full remission, but the colonoscopy was showing like it was looking mild at the time. And it was mostly in the very bottom part of my colon. So it wasn't in the whole part at the time. So she's like, I wonder if you have IBS in addition to your ulcerative colitis. So a lot of times IBS comes as a diagnosis out of a process of elimination. And so for me, it was a little bit different. It was more like, I think that maybe you have this on top of your UC because your UC is like relatively controlled, not fully in remission or anything, but still the inflammation's looking good enough for my healthcare provider to deem, thinking a lot of these other symptoms that are bothering you are probably IBS. And that came, I would say, within a year of the UC diagnosis, after trying different medications and stuff, and then having those persistent symptoms, just being like, you probably got IBS. And I do think that I do. And, now it's been 11 years and we talk now often, do we think this is IBS? Do we think this is UC? Let's check the inflammation markers. And it's a little bit of if the inflammation's down, maybe it's the IBS. But again, there's never like a exact data point that tells us exactly everything we need to know. But that's how we've been navigating it recently.
And that's challenging in itself. Do you look at, do you have any dietary triggers, and does that factor into that at all as well?
So I have tried so many different diets and things. I could name a bunch. I've tried altering, diet and lifestyle things. I've tried fad type things, celery juice and, specific carbohydrate.
Now
I
Molly.
know. I have. I've done it though. I've done
No,
it.
I'm kidding. No, we all have, and it's like
Like
this is
I've just
how.
like you get so sick that you're like, "Oh, well, I'll give it a try." So I've tried lots of stuff, not doing a lot of those things anymore. There was no like apparent quick fix. I've worked with registered dietitians before. I've used apps
Yeah.
before, things of that nature. There were periods of time where like I couldn't eat much of anything. Like pretty
Aw.
much everything kind of felt like to be a bother to me. And then there's been periods of time where I can eat a lot of things, even things that typically would upset your belly, right? And depending on the time and the day, it just
Like
kind of
Twizzlers,
depends.
like
It
Twizzlers,
just
right?
dep-
You probably eat a Twizzler and nothing happens. It's probably the worst thing you could eat. And it's like, I don't have any pain. Just
you're
kidding.
like, oh well, that was fine. Yeah, no, I mean it's true. Sometimes you're like, oh, I just ate that candy and it was fine. But then you might eat, a piece of broccoli and be like, ooh,
Oh,
that was tough. But yeah, so it's kind of just ebbed and flowed. I would say like the most helpful thing that I have done is working on my mental health. So having a therapist that I really love and trust and going to regularly, working on de-stressing tactics. We're really working on like the anxiety that I have. A lot of my anxiety is around or stemmed from and grew out of my lived experience with IBD and IBS. And it's sort of like a circle of symptoms. The gut brain connection is very close. And so it might be, am I anxious, or I'm anxious and then I have GI symptoms and I have GI symptoms and I'm anxious. And then it kind of goes around in a circle. But then also acknowledging my anxieties. And sometimes I deal with mild depression as well. And figuring out like how does that impact my body and my gut, and then also learning more about like the vagus nerve and like tactics like deep breathing in addition to therapy, in addition to moving my body in a way that feels good, which has changed over the last 11 years, and just kind of trying to focus on those things, those lifestyle things. I am by far the least perfect person there is. So I use these tactics, but I don't use them to perfection, and I'm not always regular about them, but they have been somewhat helpful.
well, I mean, what you're saying is really, it resonates. It resonates with me. And it also, I'm sure, resonates with our listeners. And I'm glad you brought up mental health because it is so critical when we're living just without a chronic illness, but having a
Mm-hmm.
chronic illness makes it even more important because many of the symptoms can be triggered and made worse because of our stress. And I remember, I think it was Dr. Tiffany Taft, who's a GI psychologist, and she
Mm-hmm.
wrote and she did a lot of research on PTSD around what happens when you have a chronic illness, whether it was at the doctor or on a medication or having a bad visit to the emergency room, and that's traumatizing. And
Mm-hmm.
like you mentioned, falling on the floor in Home Depot, probably in pain and not knowing what to do. Now, I mean, going to the store by yourself, it's probably a little angst ridden, I would imagine. I mean, I've had those
Mm-hmm.
moments where I don't want to do something because I'm afraid it's going to happen again, and our minds go crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So having a good
Mm-hmm.
toolkit, like you mentioned, it's critical.
Yeah, it really is. And I think talking about our mental health, it's hard, but I think it's like really important because the stigma's like going away, I hope, but like it's still there. And it's just really hard because it's similar to IBD in that you can't see it, right? Like, you can't see my intestinal inflammation. You can't see how anxious I am. And so it's hard to sometimes navigate the world with the invisible illnesses, essentially, because you're also afraid of like, am I going to be judged? Am I not going to be believed? Is someone going to, am I going to be looked at differently if I need help with my mental health, or I need a sick day for it, or whatever it is? Like, I think that fear is still there, or at least it hasn't escaped me anyway. And so I'm hoping that by talking about it more, it'll just contribute to making the world a place where we can all talk about it and it's just normalized, and it's just like any other illness, any other, a cut, a scrape, anything visible. It's the same.
Well, the work you're doing is so needed, and there's lots more to do, but you're paving a path to give patients a voice, and not only a voice, but a friend. It's like they can go to your website and feel like they're not alone. And that's one of the biggest things we hear over and over again, and I'm sure you have in your work, is that patients, they're afraid to feel alone. Even when they have family members, it's embarrassing. They want to be believed. They don't want to be judged and make assumptions about, oh, you look fine. Why can't you eat that? Or why don't you want to go? You're fine. And we hear that over and over again from the patients that we talk to. You know, I've seen it in my own family with a parent who had severe digestive health issues, and people, you know, it gets old when, oh, I can't do this. I'm afraid, you know, I need a bathroom. And it's like, we all need to be more empathetic towards one another sometimes or all the time, not just sometimes, but all the time when we're struggling with these things. It's not easy.
I agree.
But I want to hear about your resources, what you're doing, and where patients can access your Better Bellies by Molly. And we'll put it up on the screen for those of you that are going to watch this on YouTube, but for others, we'll have links in the description so you can connect with Better Bellies by Molly. So tell us more about what you have on your website and your community and all that good stuff.
Absolutely. So I created Better Bellies by Molly initially on Instagram. So you can find me literally at Better Bellies by Molly on Instagram. I also have a Facebook as well, but I am most active on Instagram. So definitely head over to Instagram and give a follow. Feel free to jump in the comments on any of the posts. A lot of them, I encourage interacting with one another just so people can see that they're not alone and know that it's like a safe space to talk about life with IBD or IBS. And I also have a webpage. It's betterbelliesbymolly.com. On there, it mostly just tells a little bit about what Better Bellies by Molly is, and also has links if you need to find to the social media. And then I will be relaunching my blog page that I had for a while, but then after it got hacked, it's been down for quite some time. So I am hoping to relaunch the blog by the end of this year. So that'll be up on betterbelliesbymolly.com as well. And then outside of just on social media and like promoting content and supporting patients, I've also done advocacy by advocating for healthcare and health policy reform in DC on Capitol Hill. I've been to the Hill twice to do that. I've also done some advocacy in the state of Georgia. I've also submitted opinion pieces to the local newspaper about the advocacy in DC. And then also I've volunteered with other foundations and different groups, whether it be advocacy or just sharing stories or patient education. And then I was a support group member for a Crohn's and Colitis Foundation support group for about 3 years. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or you need to get connected with somebody. Let me know. Please don't be shy. I'm happy to hear from anybody.
Well, we'll put up all the links. And again, the website has all of your accounts where people can really connect and email you directly. Molly, it's been a pleasure. We could talk all afternoon, but I know you have a lot of work to do, and we're helping patients, and this is such a pleasure. I'm so proud of all the work you're doing, and I'm glad that patients have another great resource and a friend who can make them feel like they're not alone, and I really admire what you're doing. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. It was so great to be here.
Thank you for listening to the Gastro Girl podcast. For more information and resources, please visit gastrogirl.com. Do you have a question for Gastro Girl? Please email podcast@gastrogirl.com. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in the Gastro Girl podcast are not a substitute for medical advice from your healthcare professional. Please consult a licensed clinician in your state regarding all matters related to your health.